Okay, this is my first installment on the 4th axis conversion. I've taken my little turncrafter lathe and torn it apart. Up here on the end near the headstock you can see a couple places where I've taken a coarse file and I've just filed some flats on there. Wasn't really concerned if they were in the same plane or not. It's not really going to be a problem. I took some 3/4 thick aluminum that I had and drilled a couple holes through that where I wanted to mount it to the lathe. I've also, on this one you can see it's tapered. I've already done some sanding on it. Since the legs come out at an angle, I needed to have a piece of aluminum that I could grind down at the bottom, leave thicker at the top, and then once I get it, these are pretty close to finished. They've got a little bit of way to go. I intend to bolt them onto here and then jig them up to my disc sander to get them both on the same plane and both perpendicular to the top of the bed. Here I've got my brackets bolted on. I've got them counterbored in there, and we'll get them squared up on the sander and start building the motor bracket. After I freehand sanded these before I bolt them on, you can tell just a little bit out of square here, and that's all I need to take off now that they're bolted on. Well, I've taken some pieces of scrap that I had laying around and created a fixture that'll slide in the miter gauge on my sander. It'll be a bed for the entire lathe to sit on. This will sit up to the center of the lathe bed and keep it, everything should stay square and perpendicular and plumb and all that stuff. So I can just slowly sand off those brackets. Yep, still have a little ways to go. Got to get the black off of that. This one's almost good. A little more sanding and it should be ready. Well, after a little bit of shimming and tweaking on the sander, I've got what appear to be perfectly square brackets and flat across the faces. So we're ready for our next step, which will be building a bracket that the motor will mount to, that will pivot on these for my belt adjustment. Well, after a substantial amount of drilling, sawing, filing, and polishing, I finally come up with a tolerable looking bracket for my stepper motor for the 4th axis. It has about 1.5 inches of adjustable travel here, and the belts I ordered should put it about in the center of the travel, so I've got a little room to work either way. So we're getting very close on the 4th axis here, and I'll mount the motor up and let you have a look at what that looks like. Well, here you can see the motor mounted and the pulleys in place. Still waiting on the belt. This is a 495 ounce-inch motor. It was the largest one I could find with a 1/4 inch shaft. I'd already ordered the pulleys and hadn't thought about the motor sizing. Hopefully with the 3-to-1 reduction it'll be adequate for what I need to do. We'll find out when I get everything wired up. One of the purposes of my lathe here for my 4th axis is also to be able to do manual turning on it. And the way I've set up my stepper motor on the outboard hasn't interfered with any of the normal motor and workings of the lathe, so all I have to do is pull the stepper motor belt off, engage the regular drive belt, and then I can run the variable speed on the lathe just like always. It takes about a minute to change it over, maybe 2 if I'm having a bad time of it. So it hasn't really hurt anything on the lathe, and I can continue to use it normally.